Rachel Martinez pressed her cheek against the rifle stock, her breathing steady and controlled. The morning sun cast long shadows across the corporate training facility where she had spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment. Through her scope, the target wavered slightly in the heat rising from the concrete, but her crosshairs remained perfectly aligned. This was it. The final evaluation that would determine whether she earned a spot on Tactical Solutions Incorporated's elite overseas security team. After 2 tours in Afghanistan and countless hours of training, Rachel knew she was ready. The 400-meter shot was well within her capabilities, and the conditions were ideal. Behind her in the observation tower, she could hear the low murmur of voices. Marcus Thompson, the lead instructor, was discussing something with Rebecca Walsh, the operations director who would make the final decision about overseas assignments. Rachel had heard whispers about Walsh's preferences for certain types of operators, but she dismissed them as gossip. Performance was what mattered, and her performance had been flawless throughout training. The radio crackled in her earpiece. Target will be active in 30 seconds. Remember, this is a single-shot scenario. Make it count. Rachel's finger rested alongside the trigger guard, never on it until the moment was right. She had learned that lesson years ago during her military service. Patience and precision were everything in this profession. Rush the shot, and you miss the target. Miss the target, and people die. The cardboard silhouette popped up exactly where intelligence had predicted. Rachel's world narrowed to the small circle visible through her scope. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. The crosshairs aligned perfectly with the target's center mass. Everything felt right. The rifle's weight, her body position, the gentle pressure building on the trigger. She fired. The recoil was absorbed smoothly into her shoulder. Through her scope, she watched for the telltale sign of impact. At this distance, with these conditions, there was no way she could have missed. The shot had been perfect, but the target remained untouched. Target. Missed, came the voice through her earpiece. Exercise complete. Report to the staging area for debrief. Rachel remained motionless, staring through her scope in disbelief. She had made that shot thousands of times before. The conditions had been ideal, her form textbook perfect. There was no logical explanation for the miss. Slowly, she saved her rifle and began standing. Her legs were stiff from the extended prone position, but her mind was racing. As she gathered her equipment, she noticed something that made her pause. The wind flag at the halfway point had shifted direction completely from where it had been when she took the shot, but that wasn't what bothered her most. What bothered her was watching Marcus Thompson quickly pack up equipment from a position she hadn't noticed before, a position with a clear view of her target. The debrief room felt like an interrogation chamber. Thompson sat across from her. Rachel's evaluation folder spread open on the metal table. His expression was professionally neutral, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost apologetic. "Rachel, I'll be direct," he began. "Your technical skills are solid, your conditioning excellent, and your tactical knowledge comprehensive. But today's evaluation revealed a critical weakness under pressure." "Sir, I respectfully disagree. The shot was perfect." Something interfered with either the execution or the assessment. Thompson's expression hardened. "Are you suggesting the evaluation was unfair?" "I'm suggesting something was wrong with the conditions or the target assessment." The wind flag changed direction between my trigger pull and the misannouncement. The conditions were monitored continuously. There were no irregularities. His tone was final. "You'll be reassigned to domestic security operations, effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. Domestic assignments paid a fraction of overseas work and offered no advancement opportunities. It was professional exile disguised as continued employment. That evening, Rachel sat in her apartment reviewing every detail of the evaluation. The shot had been perfect. She knew it with absolute certainty. Someone had interfered, but proving. It would require evidence she didn't have. Yet, as she prepared for bed, Rachel made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, she would begin investigating what had really happened during her evaluation. The people who had sabotaged her shot thought they had won. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the facility early, equipped with a measuring tape and notepad. She had memorized the schedule: grounds crew at 5 a.m., administrative staff at 7, instructors at 8. That gave her a 3-hour window to investigate. At her exact shooting position, everything appeared normal. The distance to the target was unchanged, the elevation identical. But when she examined the target itself, she found what she was looking for. There were 2 holes in the cardboard, one barely visible in the upper corner, and one dead center where her shot had actually landed. Someone had replaced the target between her shot and the assessment, substituting a clean one for the one that showed her perfect hit. The evidence was right there, hidden in plain sight. Rachel photographed the evidence from multiple angles, her mind already formulating a plan. Tactical Solutions prided itself on precision and integrity, values printed on their promotional materials and repeated in every company meeting. If they wanted to play games with evaluations and sabotage careers, she would hold them to their own stated standards. But she would need help, and she knew exactly where to find it. The company maintained detailed records of all training exercises, including video footage and environmental data stored in their central database. Rachel's intelligence background had taught her about computer systems and data security. More importantly, it had taught her how to find information that people preferred to keep hidden. As she left the facility that morning, Rachel felt a familiar sensation, the calm focus that came before engaging a target. The people who had sabotaged her evaluation thought the game was over. The game was just beginning. David Martinez found Rachel in the parking garage of her new corporate security assignment 3 weeks later. She recognized him from the Tactical Solutions facility, but had never spoken with him directly. He was part of a different training group, focused on close protection rather than precision shooting. "We need to talk," he said quietly, glancing around nervously. "Somewhere private." They met at a small cafe several blocks away, tucked into a corner booth where their conversation wouldn't be overheard. David looked like a man carrying a heavy secret, his fingers drumming anxiously on the table. "I heard what happened with your evaluation," he began carefully. "The official story is that you choked under pressure." Rachel kept her expression neutral. "That's what they're saying, but you don't believe it. I know what happened during that shot. The question is whether anyone else is willing to acknowledge the truth." David was quiet for several moments before speaking again. "You're not the first person this has happened to. There have been others over the past 18 months, all with similar circumstances. Perfect training records, excellent evaluations, then mysterious failures during the final test." Rachel felt her pulse quicken. This was the confirmation she had been hoping for. What kind of pattern? Women, mostly. A few men who didn't fit the profile they wanted for overseas assignments. The failures always happened during live evaluations, never during practice sessions. And everyone who fails gets reassigned to domestic work. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I kept notes on people I knew were affected. Names, dates, circumstances. It's not much, but it might help you see the bigger picture." Rachel unfolded the paper and scanned the contents. 9 names over the past year and a half, all with identical stories. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. "Why would they do this?" she asked. "Rebecca Walsh has been building relationships with specific contracting companies overseas. They prefer a certain type of operator, male, military background, willing to work in situations that might make others uncomfortable by controlling. Who gets recommended for overseas assignments. She controls the company's reputation with those clients. The pieces were starting to fit together. Walsh wasn't just discriminating. She was curating a specific image for tactical solutions overseas operations that prioritized appearance over actual competence. There's something else, David continued. The evaluation system isn't as secure as they pretend. The environmental monitoring equipment can be adjusted remotely, and the target assessment is done manually. Someone with administrative access could manipulate results without anyone knowing. Do you know who has that access? Walsh, Thompson, and maybe 2 others in the administrative office. But proving they used it would require access to system logs, and those are locked down. As they prepared to leave, David grabbed her arm gently. Be careful. These people have invested a lot in maintaining the current system. If they think you're getting too close to exposing them, they won't hesitate to shut you down. That afternoon, Rachel sat in her corporate security office, staring at surveillance monitors while processing everything David had told her. The scope of the problem was larger than she had realized. This wasn't just about her failed evaluation. It was about systematic discrimination disguised as legitimate assessment. Her solution came while watching employees badge in and out through the main entrance. Every action was recorded, time-stamped, and stored in a database. The same principle would apply to tactical solutions evaluation system. Every administrative access, every system adjustment would leave a digital footprint. She just needed to find a way to access those records. Using her security credentials, Rachel accessed the building's computer network during the overnight shift when offices were empty. Her intelligence training had included extensive digital forensics, skills that seemed irrelevant to security work but were proving invaluable now. It took her 4 nights of careful probing, but she eventually found what she was looking for. The company's backup systems included detailed logs of all administrative actions, time-stamped and linked to specific user accounts. What she found in those logs confirmed her worst suspicions. During her evaluation, there had been 3 administrative actions within minutes of her shot. The environmental monitoring system had been accessed and adjusted. The target assessment protocol had been modified, and the range cameras had been temporarily disabled during the window when the target should have been examined. All 3 actions were logged to Rebecca Walsh's administrative account, but the pattern went deeper. Rachel found similar logs for each person David had identified, showing the same sequence of manipulations during their evaluations. The evidence was comprehensive and completely irrefutable. More importantly, she discovered that another trainee's evaluation was scheduled for the following week. Jessica Torres, a former Army medic with excellent training scores, was about to become the next victim. Rachel spent the weekend preparing for what she knew would be her most dangerous move yet. If she was right about the systematic sabotage, she could prevent Jessica's evaluation from being manipulated. But doing so would reveal that someone was actively working against Walsh's system. The risk was enormous, but the alternative was watching another qualified candidate's career be destroyed by deliberate discrimination. Monday morning, Rachel positioned herself to monitor the Tactical Solutions Network in real time during Jessica's evaluation. She had prepared backdoor access to the administrative systems and was ready to counter any manipulation attempts. Through remote access, she could see Jessica taking position on the range. Her form was perfect, her preparation thorough. The environmental conditions were ideal for accurate shooting. Then, 30 seconds before Jessica's scheduled shot, Rachel saw Walsh's administrative account access the environmental monitoring system. The wind speed reading was adjusted upward by 15%, enough to affect trajectory calculations, but subtle enough to appear normal. Rachel's response was immediate. She countered the adjustment, restoring the actual environmental data. When Walsh tried to modify the atmospheric pressure readings, Rachel corrected those too. The digital battle played out in real time, invisible to everyone except the two women who understood what was happening. Walsh was trying to sabotage another evaluation while Rachel fought to ensure fair assessment. Jessica's shot was perfect. Through the facility's security cameras, Rachel could see the confusion spreading through the evaluation team as their environmental data showed normal readings and the target assessment confirmed a center mass hit. There was no plausible way to declare the evaluation a failure. Rachel watched Walsh's face through the security feed, seeing barely controlled fury as her carefully orchestrated sabotage was undone by forces she couldn't identify. Jessica Torres was accepted for overseas assignment immediately, but Rachel knew her intervention had only won a single battle. Walsh would investigate what had happened, trying to understand how her sabotage had been detected and countered. The war against systematic discrimination was just beginning. That evening, Rachel received a text from David, heard about Jessica's evaluation. Walsh is demanding a complete system audit. Be ready. The message confirmed what Rachel had expected. Her digital intervention had been successful, but it had also revealed that someone was actively working against the discrimination system. The next phase would be more dangerous as Walsh actively hunted for her unknown opponent. Rachel spent the night copying her evidence to multiple secure locations and preparing for the escalation she knew was coming. She had prevented one injustice, but exposing the entire system would require taking even greater risks. The people who thought they controlled the evaluation process were about to learn that someone was shooting back. Rachel's termination notice was waiting on her desk when she arrived at work Monday morning. The document was brief and devastating. Her contract with Tactical Solutions was being terminated immediately for performance issues and violation of company policies. The timing wasn't coincidental. Walsh had clearly decided that whoever interfered with Jessica's evaluation was someone with ongoing system access. By terminating Rachel's employment, she was eliminating a potential threat while maintaining legal cover. But Walsh had made a critical error. She had acted too quickly. Before understanding the full scope of Rachel's investigation or the evidence that had been gathered, the termination actually provided additional proof of retaliation. More importantly, it freed Rachel from any obligation to protect Tactical Solutions from legal consequences. That afternoon, Rachel sent detailed reports to the Department of Labor's Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Her documentation included the manipulated evaluation logs, the pattern of discriminatory failures, and real-time evidence of Walsh's attempted sabotage. She also contacted several investigative journalists who specialized in defense contractor misconduct. The response was immediate. Within 48 hours, federal investigators had opened a formal inquiry into Tactical Solutions evaluation practices. The company's federal contracts were placed under review, and Rebecca Walsh was placed on administrative leave. Agent Patricia Williams, the lead investigator, called Rachel within the week. "We've seen cases like this before, but your documentation is some of the most comprehensive evidence we've encountered. The real-time intervention during the Torres evaluation gives us direct proof of intentional sabotage." Their first meeting lasted 4 hours and covered every aspect of Rachel's experience. Williams was particularly interested in the digital evidence, which provided clear documentation of systematic manipulation rather than isolated incidents of bias. "The pattern you've identified shows deliberate discrimination disguised as legitimate evaluation," Williams noted. "But we need to understand the broader scope. If this was happening at Tactical Solutions, it's likely happening elsewhere." As the federal investigation proceeded, more victims came forward. The 9 people David had identified were joined by others who had experienced similar treatment but had been afraid to speak out initially. The scope of discrimination became clear. Over 3 years, Rebecca Walsh had systematically excluded dozens of qualified candidates from overseas assignments, costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost income. But the most damaging revelation came from Marcus Thompson himself. Thompson requested a private meeting with federal investigators, where he revealed that Walsh had ordered him to modify evaluation criteria to ensure certain candidates would fail, regardless of their actual performance. "I thought I was following legitimate company policy," Thompson explained. "Walsh told me that overseas clients had specific requirements, and our evaluations needed to reflect those preferences. I didn't realize I was participating in illegal discrimination." Thompson's testimony provided the crucial evidence of intentional discrimination implemented through company policy rather than individual bias. The federal investigation concluded with a comprehensive report that vindicated Rachel's allegations. Tactical Solutions faced substantial fines, loss of federal contracts, and court-ordered reform of their evaluation systems. Rebecca Walsh was terminated and faced personal legal consequences. Several other executives were disciplined for failing to prevent the discriminatory practices. But for Rachel, the most satisfying outcome was the settlement agreement requiring Tactical Solutions to offer overseas assignments to all discriminated candidates with compensation for lost income. 3 months after her termination, Rachel found herself back at the evaluation range for a legitimate assessment conducted under federal oversight. This time, there would be no sabotage, no manipulation. Her shot was perfect, exactly as it had been the first time. Standing in the observation tower, Agent Williams watched through binoculars as Rachel's bullet struck dead center. "Some shots are worth waiting for," she commented to the company's new leadership. Rachel remained in position for several seconds after the shot, not from uncertainty about the result, but to savor the moment. This time, the evaluation was fair. This time, her performance would be judged on merit. As she gathered her equipment, Rachel reflected on the journey from sabotage evaluation to vindication. The shot that had seemed to end her career had actually exposed systematic discrimination that affected countless others. Her willingness to fight back had not only restored her own opportunities, but had protected future candidates from similar discrimination. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the most important shot isn't the one that hits the intended target. Sometimes it's the one that reveals the truth and demands justice. Rachel's vindication at Tactical Solutions felt incomplete as she prepared for her new overseas assignment. The investigation had exposed Walsh's discrimination, but questions remained about how such systematic bias had persisted for years without detection. The answer came from an unexpected source during the installation of new oversight systems required by the federal settlement. The IT contractor discovered something hidden in the company's network architecture that changed everything. "You need to see this," David told Rachel during a quiet conversation at the facility's break room. He had been retained as part of the reform effort and was reviewing historical data for other potential problems. "What did you find?" The evaluation manipulation wasn't just Walsh's personal project. There was a systematic backup protocol that automatically created false documentation to support discriminatory decisions. Every time Walsh sabotaged an evaluation, the system generated fake environmental data, modified candidate files, and created fabricated performance reviews. The implications were staggering. Walsh hadn't just been manipulating individual evaluations. She had been operating a comprehensive system designed to hide discrimination while maintaining legal cover. "How long was this operational?" Rachel asked. "Based on the logs we've recovered, at least 5 years." The system was sophisticated enough to create believable alternative records for every discriminatory action. If you hadn't caught Walsh in real time during Jessica's evaluation, she might have continued indefinitely. Rachel realized how close the truth had come to remaining hidden. A digital intervention hadn't just prevented Jessica's sabotage. It had revealed an elaborate cover-up system that would have protected Walsh from future investigation. Agent Williams called with even more disturbing news. The discrimination system wasn't unique to tactical solutions. We've identified similar setups at 4 other defense contractors, all using identical architecture. Someone was selling discrimination as a service to companies wanting to exclude certain demographics while maintaining legal cover. The conspiracy was industry-wide, operated by a consulting firm called Strategic Assessment Solutions. Run by former Pentagon official Robert Kane, the company marketed cultural fit assessment and operational readiness optimization, while actually providing sophisticated discrimination tools. Kane's systems allowed companies to discriminate based on protected characteristics while generating documentation that would withstand legal scrutiny. The false environmental data and fabricated records Walsh had used were products of Kane's discrimination infrastructure. "We need your help," Williams continued. "Your technical background makes you uniquely qualified to assist in the broader investigation. Would you be willing to work with us?" Rachel didn't hesitate. These people destroyed careers while hiding behind legitimate business practices. They need to be held accountable. Working with the federal task force, Rachel helped map connections between Strategic Assessment Solutions and its client companies. The scope was breathtaking. Dozens of contractors had purchased Kane's tools, affecting thousands of candidates over nearly a decade. Rachel's role was analyzing the technical aspects of discrimination systems and helping investigators understand manipulation methods. Her intelligence background and first-hand experience made her invaluable in documenting the systematic exclusion of qualified candidates. But proving intentional discrimination rather than flawed evaluation processes would be challenging. Kane and his associates had maintained plausible deniability by marketing discrimination tools as optimization systems designed to select candidates most likely to succeed in challenging environments. The breakthrough came when Rachel suggested examining outcomes rather than methods. If these were legitimate optimization systems, they should have improved operational effectiveness. If they were discrimination tools, they should have excluded qualified candidates while retaining less capable ones based on demographics. The data analysis was damning. Companies using Kane systems showed no improvement in operational effectiveness or mission success rates. Many showed declining performance as qualified candidates were systematically excluded. More tellingly, excluded candidates consistently outperformed their replacements when given opportunities at companies without discriminatory systems. The pattern constituted statistical proof of systematic bias rather than merit-based selection. This evidence allowed the task force to expand their investigation to include racketeering charges. Kane's operation wasn't just discriminating. It was defrauding clients by selling ineffective services while claiming to improve outcomes. The racketeering angle encouraged cooperation from companies that could now be treated as fraud victims rather than discrimination co-conspirators, providing access to additional evidence hidden in corporate networks. Rachel found herself at the center of a case reshaping how the justice system approached systematic discrimination in defense contracting. A sabotaged evaluation had uncovered a conspiracy affecting thousands of careers and millions of dollars in lost income. But personal costs were mounting. Her investigation work required extensive travel and long hours analyzing evidence, while constant vigilance was needed against retaliation from threatened individuals. The harassment escalated after her congressional testimony about discrimination in federal contracting. Her detailed technical testimony was devastating to companies profiting from candidate exclusion. But within hours, her identity was leaked to industry publications with unflattering characterizations as a disgruntled employee making frivolous allegations. The smear campaign was sophisticated and well-funded, suggesting coordination between threatened companies. Articles questioned Rachel's military record, technical competence, and motives for cooperating with investigators. But the attack backfired. Other discrimination victims recognized the retaliation tactics and came forward with their own stories of intimidation. The witness intimidation pattern provided additional conspiracy evidence and demonstrated the lengths the discrimination network would go to protect itself. Media attention from the smear campaign brought national focus to systematic discrimination in defense contracting. Investigative journalists examined connections between Kane's firm and client companies, revealing the human cost through interviews with excluded candidates. As the investigation approached its climax, Rachel reflected on her journey from sabotaged evaluation to national scandal centerpiece. The shot that had seemingly ended her career had begun a process that would reshape an entire industry. But the work was far from finished. Exposing the conspiracy was only the first step. Real challenge would be ensuring systematic changes to prevent future discrimination were actually implemented and maintained. Upcoming trials would determine whether responsible individuals faced meaningful consequences. Civil lawsuits would establish whether profiting companies would be held financially accountable. Regulatory reforms debated in Congress would decide whether the industry would be required to implement genuine safeguards. The system that had tried to silence her was fighting back with every available resource. The next phase would determine whether justice was just a legal concept or practical reality for people whose careers had been destroyed by discrimination, disguised as legitimate business practice. The congressional hearing room buzzed with tension. As Rachel took her seat at the witness table, camera lights illuminated the formal chamber where she would testify about systematic discrimination. Behind her, rows of reporters, investigators, and industry representatives waited for testimony that could reshape defense contracting. Rebecca Walsh sat with her legal team, no longer the confident executive who had once controlled evaluations. Robert Kane, architect of the discrimination network, whispered urgently with his attorneys. Representatives from multiple contractors filled the gallery, expressions ranging from concern to hostile. The hearing had been delayed twice due to legal challenges from companies claiming the investigation violated trade secrets. Each delay brought increased pressure on witnesses, including anonymous threats and coordinated media attacks designed to discredit testimony. Congressman Michael Rodriguez called the hearing to order. "We are here to examine allegations of systematic discrimination in defense contractor evaluation and hiring practices, suggesting qualified candidates were excluded based on protected characteristics rather than merit." Rachel's testimony began with her tactical solutions experience, but expanded to encompass the broader conspiracy she had helped expose. She explained technical manipulation methods, sophisticated documentation, systems designed to hide discrimination, and the industry-wide network profiting from candidate exclusion. The discrimination wasn't accidental or unconscious bias, Rachel testified. It was systematic, deliberate, and designed to be legally defensible through false documentation and fabricated records. The responsible parties built infrastructure, specifically to exclude protected classes while maintaining plausible deniability. Committee questioning was sharp and focused. They wanted to understand not just what happened, but how such extensive conspiracy operated without detection for years. "Ms. Martinez," asked Congresswoman Jennifer Walsh, "you've alleged this network affected thousands of candidates across dozens of companies. How was such extensive operation kept secret?" The network operated through compartmentalization and mutual protection. Individual companies thought they were purchasing legitimate optimization services. They didn't know other companies were using identical systems for similar discrimination. The consulting firm maintained client confidentiality while coordinating overall strategy. Technical testimony was supported by digital forensics experts, whose evidence showed beyond doubt that evaluation manipulations were intentional and coordinated rather than accidental or isolated. The most powerful testimony came from other victims. Given opportunity to tell their stories publicly, Jessica Torres described the psychological impact of being told she had failed under pressure when she knew her performance was perfect. I questioned everything about my abilities, training, judgment. I thought maybe I wasn't cut out for this work. It took months to recover confidence, even after learning the evaluation was rigged. Marcus Thompson provided crucial insider perspective on how conspiracy operated at ground level. I was told overseas clients had specific preferences for operator types. The implication was these preferences were based on operational effectiveness rather than bias. I was given criteria that seemed objective, but were designed to exclude certain candidates regardless of qualifications. Industry representatives who testified after whistleblowers attempted to minimize the problem and question evidence credibility. They argued alleged discrimination was actually a result of legitimate operational effectiveness and client requirement concerns. Robert Kane's testimony was particularly brazen. Despite overwhelming evidence of his role creating discrimination tools, he maintained his company provided legitimate consulting services for improved candidate selection. Strategic assessment solutions helped clients identify candidates most likely to succeed in challenging overseas environments. Our tools were based on extensive research into success predicting characteristics. Any disparate impact was unintentional and reflected legitimate job requirements. Kane's polished performance was undermined by documentary evidence showing his systems had no correlation with job performance. Government statistical analysis demonstrated his optimization tools actually reduced effectiveness while systematically excluding qualified candidates. The hearing's most dramatic moment came when Congressman Rodriguez confronted Kane with internal communications obtained through federal investigation. Mr. Kane, I'm reading from your email stating, "The beauty of our system is giving you desired demographic outcomes while providing bulletproof legal documentation. How do you reconcile this with testimony about unintentional disparate impact?" Kane's composure cracked. That communication was taken out of context. The legal documentation ensured client selection processes were defensible based on legitimate job-related criteria. But the same email discusses fine-tuning demographic filters and adjusting outcome percentages to meet client preferences. Those don't sound like job-related criteria, Mr. Kane. By hearing's end, the discrimination network's scope and intentional nature were established beyond reasonable doubt. Testimony revealed not isolated bias incidents, but systematic conspiracy designed to exclude qualified candidates while generating false documentation. Federal prosecutors had built their case carefully, using racketeering charges to demonstrate the discrimination network constituted ongoing criminal enterprise. Evidence included financial records showing consulting firm and client company payments, communications revealing discriminatory practice coordination, and statistical analysis proving systematic protected class exclusion. The first trial focused on Kane and strategic assessment solutions. Prosecution argued Kane created and marketed tools specifically for implementing discrimination while providing client legal cover. Kane's defense portrayed him as legitimate business consultant misunderstood by overzealous investigators. They argued his assessment tools were based on genuine job performance research and discriminatory outcomes were unintentional side effects. But prosecution evidence was overwhelming. Internal communications showed Kane explicitly discussing protected class exclusion methods while maintaining legal defensibility. Financial records revealed premium pricing for sophisticated discrimination. Capabilities. Former employee testimony confirmed the company's real business model was discrimination as a service. Rachel's Kane trial testimony was methodical and devastating. She walked the jury through discrimination system technical aspects, explaining operation and demonstrating intentional nature. Her false documentation system analysis showed sophisticated lengths Kane had gone to hide discriminatory practices. The defendant didn't just help companies discriminate, Rachel testified. He created infrastructure allowing systematic discrimination to operate industrially while providing legitimate business practice illusion. The jury deliberated less than 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Kane was sentenced to 8 years federal prison with substantial fines and victim restitution orders. Kane's conviction sent shockwaves through defense contracting. Other companies purchasing his services rushed to settle civil lawsuits and implement compliance reforms. Several executives resigned as companies sought scandal distance. Victory came with personal costs for Rachel. High-profile testimony made her a retaliation target from threatened individuals and companies. Her personal information was posted online by anonymous critics. Death threats required FBI protection. More subtly, she found herself blacklisted. By industry segments, companies not directly implicated were reluctant hiring someone synonymous with exposing misconduct. The situation was resolved through an unexpected Justice Department offer. Agent Williams approached Rachel about joining a new task force preventing federal contracting discrimination. We need people understanding both technical system aspects and discrimination's human impact. Your experience makes you uniquely qualified, helping us develop safeguards preventing future conspiracies like what you exposed. The position offered Rachel opportunity continuing the discrimination fight while applying technical skills in new contexts. More importantly, it provided a path forward, honoring her justice commitment while protecting her from industry retaliation. As Rachel prepared for her new role, she reflected on the journey from sabotaged evaluation to National Scandal Center. The shot seeming to end her career had actually opened paths to more meaningful work than previously imagined. The battle against systematic discrimination was far from over. Convictions and settlements addressed egregious coordinated bias examples. But changing industry culture would require sustained effort and vigilance. Systems designed to exclude her and thousands of others had been exposed and dismantled. Now came harder work-building systems actually judging candidates on merit rather than demographic characteristics. It was different precision shooting, aiming not at range targets, but at structural inequities preventing qualified people from achieving potential. Stakes were higher, targets more complex, but fundamental principles remained: patience, precision, and willingness to take the shot when the moment was right. 6 months after Robert Kane's conviction, Rachel found herself in a familiar position, prone behind a rifle, focused through a scope. But this time, she wasn't on a corporate range or combat zone. She was at the FBI Academy's Quantico facility, qualifying for her federal investigator role specializing in defense contractor fraud. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same precision shooting skills used to exclude her from overseas assignments were now being validated by the federal government as essential qualifications for her new position. We need investigators who can speak the industry language they're investigating, Agent Williams had explained. Your technical credibility gives you access to information traditional white-collar investigators might never obtain. The qualification shoot was flawless, but Rachel's mind focused on the case that would define her new career: Rebecca Walsh's prosecution and the remaining discrimination network members. Walsh's trial had been delayed multiple times as her legal team challenged everything from digital evidence admissibility to federal court jurisdiction over employment practices. Each delay brought continued attempts discrediting Rachel and other witnesses through media manipulation and personal attacks. But delays had provided time for investigation expansion and strengthening. Additional victims came forward with decade-old discrimination evidence. Financial records showed conspiracy scope and profits generated through systematic candidate exclusion. Most importantly, several co-conspirators agreed cooperating with federal prosecutors for reduced sentences. Their testimony would provide insider details about discrimination network operation and evolution. Rachel's phone buzzed with Agent Williams' text. Walsh trial starts Monday. Final prep meeting tomorrow at 8 a.m. This is the big one. Walsh's trial would be the culmination of everything they had worked toward. Unlike Kane, who operated from shadows as consulting service provider, Walsh had been visible executive, making direct candidate evaluation decisions. Her conviction would send clear messages that systematic discrimination wouldn't be tolerated at any industry level. Walsh's defense team was formidable, led by prominent white-collar attorneys specializing in corporate executive defense. They had signaled intentions, arguing Walsh followed company policy rather than implementing personal discrimination, and any protected class disparate impact was unintentional. The defense strategy was sophisticated and potentially effective. By portraying Walsh as middle manager following directives from above, they could argue she lacked criminal intent necessary for conviction. Rachel knew her testimony would be crucial defeating this strategy. She was the only witness providing real-time evidence of Walsh's deliberate evaluation system manipulation. Her digital intervention during Jessica Torres's assessment created unambiguous intentional sabotage records that couldn't be explained as policy compliance or unintentional bias. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with protesters outside the federal courthouse. Discrimination victim supporters carried signs demanding accountability. Counter-protesters, apparently organized by industry groups, claimed prosecutions were politically motivated attacks on legitimate business practices. Walsh sat at the defense table looking smaller and less imposing than Rachel remembered. The confident executive who once controlled career outcomes now appeared nervous and diminished, whispering urgently with attorneys as potential jurors filed in. Jury selection took 2 days, with both sides screening potential jurors for employment discrimination, defense contractor, and workplace gender equality bias. The final jury was demographically and professionally diverse, including several veterans. Understanding military contracting industry culture. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Morrison delivered the prosecution opening statement. Morrison's presentation was methodical and compelling, outlining evidence demonstrating Walsh's systematic discrimination and criminal conspiracy participation. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a defendant who abused her position of trust to deny opportunities to qualified candidates based on gender and ethnicity rather than merit. Evidence will show Rebecca Walsh didn't just discriminate. She created and operated systems designed hiding discrimination behind false documentation and fabricated performance records. The defense opening was delivered by Walsh's lead attorney, Margaret Chen, skilled advocate known for humanizing corporate defendants. Chen's strategy was immediately apparent. Acknowledged discrimination occurred while arguing Walsh was scapegoat rather than systematic bias architect. Rebecca Walsh is not some elaborate conspiracy mastermind. She was middle management trying to implement company policies in an industry with established practices and client expectations. The government once holding her personally responsible for systemic problems going far beyond any individual's actions. The government case began with discriminated victim testimony, providing human context for following technical evidence. Jessica Torres was among first witnesses. describing her sabotaged evaluation experience and psychological impact on confidence and career prospects. I knew my performance was perfect. Conditions were ideal, my form correct, and I could see. Through my scope, the shot hit exactly where I aimed. When they told me I missed, I started questioning everything about my abilities. It took months recovering from that psychological damage, even after learning the evaluation was rigged. Technical evidence followed, documenting discrimination's systematic nature. Digital forensics experts testified about evaluation manipulation. Systems, financial analysts explained victim economic impact, and statisticians demonstrated discriminatory outcome impossibility being coincidental. Most dramatic testimony came from Marcus Thompson, former tactical solutions instructor, pressured implementing discriminatory evaluation practices. Thompson's testimony provided crucial insider perspective on Walsh's direct conspiracy involvement. Ms. Walsh was very clear about expectations, Thompson testified. She told me certain candidate types weren't suitable for overseas assignments, regardless of qualifications. She provided specific evaluation criteria guidance that would exclude those candidates while maintaining objective assessment appearance. Thompson's testimony was particularly damaging because it demonstrated Walsh's active role designing and implementing discriminatory practices rather than simply following company policy. His detailed conversation and instruction recollections provided intent evidence prosecution needed for conviction. Defense cross-examination of Thompson was aggressive but ultimately ineffective. Chun attempted portraying him as disgruntled former employee seeking to shift blame for his own discriminatory actions. But Thompson's testimony was corroborated by extensive documentary evidence and consistent with multiple victim experiences. As prosecution case progressed, Walsh's culpability evidence became overwhelming. Digital logs showed her direct evaluation system manipulation involvement. Financial records documented economic benefits she received maintaining discriminatory practices. Communications with other conspirators revealed her role coordinating systematic protected class exclusion. Rachel's testimony came during trial's second week after evidence foundation establishment. Her role was providing real-time Walsh sabotage, attempt documentation, and explaining discrimination system technical aspects. Ms. Martinez, Prosecutor Morrison asked, "Please tell the jury what you observed during Jessica Torres's evaluation." Rachel's testimony was precise and comprehensive. She explained how she positioned herself monitoring evaluation systems real-time, documented Walsh's environmental data and assessment criteria manipulation attempts, and described her intervention, preventing sabotage success. The defendant accessed environmental monitoring system 30 seconds before Ms. Torres's scheduled shot. She modified wind speed readings creating conditions causing miss, even though actual environmental conditions were ideal for accurate shooting. Defense cross-examination was intense but respectful. Chun recognized attacking Rachel's credibility would be counterproductive given her whistleblower status exposing systematic discrimination. Instead, she focused on technical questions designed creating doubt about Rachel's digital evidence interpretation. Ms. Martinez, isn't it possible the system modifications you observed were routine maintenance or calibration activities rather than deliberate sabotage? Rachel's response was firm and evidence-supported. No, that's not possible. Modifications were made to specific data points during narrow time window immediately before candidates shot. They were reversed immediately after assessment completion. That pattern is inconsistent with maintenance or calibration, but perfectly consistent with deliberate manipulation design causing failure. Rachel's testimony technical aspects were supported by demonstrative evidence helping jury understand discrimination system complexity and intentionality. Computer animations showed manipulation accomplishment, while statistical analysis demonstrated system error. Patterns during protected class candidate evaluations were statistically impossible without deliberate intervention. By Rachel's testimony end, prosecution had established beyond reasonable doubt that Walsh systematically and intentionally discriminated against qualified candidates while creating false documentation hiding her actions. Defense attempts portraying her as passive company policy implementer were thoroughly debunked by evidence of her direct discriminatory system design and operation involvement. Trial conclusion was almost anticlimactic after overwhelming evidence presentation. Walsh's defense called few witnesses and relied primarily on proportional punishment arguments and defense, contracting industry systemic problem nature. But jury verdict was swift and decisive. Guilty on all counts, including conspiracy, civil rights violations, and fraud. Conviction carried potential 15-year federal prison sentence, substantial fines, and lifetime federal contracting work exclusion. As verdict was read, Rachel felt complex emotions. Justice was served for Walsh's discrimination victims, but victory felt incomplete. Walsh was just one person in a system enabling and protecting systematic bias for years. Real change would require sustained effort reforming industry practices and culture. But conviction also represented something important: proof that systematic discrimination would face serious consequences, regardless of cover-up sophistication or perpetrator power. The message was clear: merit would be protected, and those trying to subvert it would be held accountable. Standing outside courthouse after verdict, Rachel was approached by a young woman introducing herself as Maria Santos, recent military veteran seeking private security opportunities. "I wanted thanking you," Santos said. "I know I'll face fair evaluation process because of what you did. You didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for all of us coming after." The comment reminded Rachel why she had been willing risking everything exposing the discrimination network. It wasn't about personal vindication, though that was important. It was about ensuring merit would be the only factor determining opportunities and outcomes. The shot seeming to end her career had actually created possibility for thousands of future candidates being judged solely on qualifications and performance. That was legacy worth the struggle, worth retaliation, worth personal costs she had endured. Walking away from courthouse, Rachel reflected on the journey bringing her from sabotaged evaluation to federal courtroom. Precision shooting skills defining her military career had evolved into something more powerful: ability targeting injustice with same accuracy she had once applied to distant targets. War against systematic discrimination was far from over, but important battle had been won. Systems designed excluding qualified candidates had been exposed and dismantled. Responsible people had faced meaningful consequences. Future candidates would have opportunities succeeding or failing based on their own merit rather than others' prejudices. It was victory type, not requiring scope to appreciate. Target had been large. Shot had been clean, and result had been exactly what justice demanded. 2 years after Rebecca Walsh's conviction, Rachel stood in Tactical Solutions Incorporated's boardroom, facing the company's new leadership team. Corporate culture had undergone dramatic transformation since the discrimination scandal, but deeper changes were still needed, preventing future systemic bias. As lead investigator for the Justice Department's Defense Contractor Compliance Division, Rachel had been tasked conducting comprehensive review of the company's reformed evaluation and hiring practices. Her report would determine whether Tactical Solutions could regain federal contracting privileges and access to lucrative overseas security assignments. The meeting was tense from outset. While company's new executives publicly supported reforms, Rachel could sense underlying resentment about federal oversight imposed following discrimination scandal. Several board members clearly viewed her as antagonist, whose continued involvement threatened their reputation rebuilding efforts. Ms. Martinez, began CEO Jonathan Hayes, Brian leading company rehabilitation efforts. We appreciate government commitment ensuring fair employment practices, but our analysis suggests current oversight requirements may be excessive given comprehensive reforms we've already implemented. Rachel had heard similar arguments from other companies seeking to minimize federal supervision. Pattern was always same. Initial cooperation followed by gradual resistance as reforms impose real constraints on traditional practices. Mr. Hayes, Rachel replied, reforms have been significant, but our analysis shows certain structural problems persist. Evaluation systems have been redesigned, but corporate culture enabling systematic discrimination requires additional attention. Room tension was palpable as Rachel presented findings. While most egregious evaluation manipulation examples had been eliminated, subtle biases remained embedded in company assessment processes. Demographic patterns in assignment decisions suggested unconscious bias continued influencing supposedly objective evaluations. More concerning were signs some executives were actively working circumventing new oversight systems. Rachel's investigation had uncovered communications suggesting coordination with other defense contractors, sharing information about problematic candidates who had filed discrimination complaints or cooperated with federal investigations. Evidence suggests informal blacklisting practices have replaced formal discrimination systems, Rachel explained. Qualified candidates are being excluded through coordinated information sharing rather than manipulated evaluations. Outcome is same. Systematic exclusion based on protected characteristics rather than merit. Hayes' response was defensive but carefully worded. Any information sharing between companies is limited to legitimate business concerns about candidate reliability and security clearance status. We would never participate in discrimination based on protected characteristics. But Rachel had learned reading between corporate communication lines. Language of candidate reliability and cultural fit had become code words for demographic preferences that couldn't be stated explicitly. Discrimination had become more subtle, but no less systematic. Investigation had also revealed attempts intimidating reformed evaluation systems through legal challenges and political pressure. Industry lobbying groups argued federal oversight was hampering operational effectiveness and creating competitive disadvantages for American companies. These arguments were familiar to Rachel from other compliance cases. Companies profiting from discriminatory practices invariably claimed fair evaluation systems would compromise effectiveness or competitiveness. Arguments were rarely evidence-supported, but often politically effective with sympathetic legislators. Mr. Hayes, Rachel continued, our concern is that company may be reverting to discriminatory practices through more subtle means. Federal oversight isn't just about preventing obvious manipulation. It's about ensuring fundamental commitment to merit-based evaluation becomes genuinely embedded in corporate culture. Boardroom fell silent as Rachel's words hung in air. She could see calculation in Hayes' eyes as he weighed response. Company needed federal approval regaining full contracting privileges, but accepting continued oversight would limit operational flexibility and maintain unwanted scrutiny. Moment was interrupted by urgent knock on conference room door. Hayes' assistant entered with urgent expression and whispered something making CEO's face darken considerably. Ladies and gentlemen, Hayes announced after brief legal counsel consultation, I've just been informed Justice Department has unsealed additional indictments related to discrimination investigation. Several executives from partner companies were arrested this morning on conspiracy and witness intimidation charges. Rachel felt her phone vibrate with encrypted Agent Williams' message. Operation Clean Sweep executing now. Multiple arrests across 7 companies. Your recommendations triggered expanded investigation. Stay alert. Some targets still at large. Message confirmed what Rachel had suspected during compliance reviews. Discrimination network hadn't been dismantled by earlier prosecutions. It had simply evolved into more sophisticated coordination and retaliation forms. Informal blacklisting practices she had documented were part of broader conspiracy maintaining discriminatory outcomes while avoiding legal vulnerabilities destroying original system. Mr. Hayes, Rachel said carefully, I think this development reinforces importance maintaining robust federal oversight. Temptation reverting to discriminatory practices appears stronger than your leadership initially realized. But Hayes was no longer focused on compliance discussion. He was reading urgent phone messages while conferring quietly with the legal team. Morning's arrests had clearly disrupted whatever coordination had been occurring between defense contractors seeking to minimize federal oversight. Within minutes, boardroom had emptied except for Rachel and two company attorneys frantically making Washington phone calls. Carefully orchestrated presentation about reduced oversight needs had been abandoned for damage control as new prosecution. Scope became clear. Rachel used disruption reviewing secure messages flooding her phone. Justice Department's expanded investigation had been triggered by patterns her compliance reviews identified across multiple companies. Coordination she had suspected was not only real but more extensive than initially realized. Arrests included executives from 6 major defense contractors, 2 consulting firms replacing Kane's operation, and former Pentagon official facilitating information sharing enabling continued discrimination. Charges ranged from conspiracy and civil rights violations to witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. But most significant arrest was someone Rachel knew personally, Marcus Thompson, former tactical solutions instructor whose testimony had been crucial convicting Rebecca Walsh, man who had seemed remorseful about his discriminatory evaluation. Implementation role had apparently been recruited helping design new systems for circumventing federal oversight. Betrayal was personal as well as professional. Rachel had trusted Thompson's apparent reform commitment and had even recommended him for positions at companies seeking evaluation practice improvement. Instead, he had been using that access helping maintain discriminatory outcomes through more sophisticated methods. Secure call from Agent Williams provided additional Thompson role details in expanded conspiracy. He was technical architect for new discrimination systems, Williams explained. After his testimony against Walsh, several companies approached him, helping them maintain demographic preferences while avoiding legal vulnerabilities destroying Kane's network. Irony was bitter. Thompson's insider knowledge of how discrimination had been detected and prosecuted had made him invaluable to companies seeking continuing systematic bias without triggering federal investigation. His supposed redemption had actually been recruitment into even more sophisticated conspiracy. What's his exposure? Rachel asked. Substantial. We have him on wire intercepts, coordinating blacklisting practices you identified, plus witness intimidation against people filing discrimination complaints. He's looking at 20 years minimum, and he knows it. Investigation had also revealed extent to which political pressure had been applied limiting federal oversight of defense contractor employment practices. Lobbying records showed millions spent on campaigns, characterizing compliance requirements as burdensome regulations compromising national security. Conspiracy's political dimension was particularly troubling because it showed how discrimination advocates had attempted using national security concerns protecting discriminatory practices. Argument that oversight requirements compromised operational effectiveness had been deliberately crafted appealing to legislators who might otherwise support anti-discrimination enforcement. But most disturbing revelation was evidence some government officials had been compromised by defense contractor network. Arrested former Pentagon official had been providing advance warning, about planned compliance reviews and sharing information about investigators and witnesses. Corruption had created a cycle where discriminatory practices were protected by officials who should have been preventing them. Companies maintaining preferred demographic profiles in overseas operations received favorable treatment in contract competitions, while those prioritizing merit-based selection faced additional scrutiny and regulatory challenges. Rachel's role exposing this expanded conspiracy had made her retaliation target going beyond industry intimidation she had previously experienced. Wire intercepts captured discussions about discrediting her through false allegations and manufactured professional misconduct evidence. They were planning destroying your career same way they tried destroying your evaluation, Williams explained during secure briefing later that day. Difference is now we have them on tape discussing plan, which makes it conspiracy to violate civil rights rather than just attempted retaliation. Threat scope had required protective measures Rachel found both gratifying and disturbing. Same precision and dedication she had applied exposing discrimination was now being turned against her by people viewing her as existential threat to their systematic bias maintenance ability. But expanded arrests had also created opportunities for additional cooperation from defendants seeking to minimize their own exposure. Several executives coordinating blacklisting practices were now providing information about broader discrimination and retaliation network. Information they provided revealed conspiracy had been even more extensive than original Kane network. While Kane had focused providing technical tools for manipulating evaluations, New Network had created comprehensive systems maintaining discriminatory outcomes across entire employment lifecycle. Candidates flagged as problematic, typically those filing discrimination complaints or cooperating with federal investigations, were tracked through shared databases following them company to company. Blacklisting was so comprehensive that qualified candidates could be effectively excluded from entire defense contracting industry. System had also been designed rewarding companies maintaining preferred demographic profiles in overseas operations. Informal coordination between major contractors ensured companies prioritizing diversity faced disadvantages in contract competitions, while those maintaining traditional demographics received preferential treatment. Rachel's compliance reviews had documented these patterns without initially understanding their coordinated nature. What had appeared as coincidental similarities between companies was actually evidence of systematic coordination designed maintaining discriminatory outcomes while avoiding legal liability. Breakthrough came when her analysis identified communication patterns between companies, suggesting active coordination rather than independent decision-making. Timing of personnel decisions, similarity of evaluation criteria modifications, and consistent demographic outcomes across supposedly independent companies revealed ongoing conspiracy existence. Armed with this analysis, federal investigators obtained surveillance warrants capturing coordination real-time. Wire intercepts provided irrefutable evidence of ongoing discrimination and witness intimidation supporting prosecutions under both civil rights and racketeering statutes. Legal strategy was similar to approach successful against Kane's network, but scope was much broader. Instead of prosecuting individual companies for isolated discrimination, government was treating entire network as criminal enterprise engaged in systematic civil rights violations. Racketeering charges were particularly powerful because they allowed prosecutors seeking asset forfeiture from companies profiting from discriminatory practices. Financial penalties would be substantial enough, deterring future discrimination, while providing meaningful victim compensation. But Rachel understood legal victories, while important, were only part of solution. Underlying culture enabling systematic discrimination would require sustained effort to change. Arrests and prosecutions would eliminate most egregious coordinated bias examples, but preventing future discrimination would require ongoing vigilance and enforcement. Afternoon's developments had transformed compliance meeting from routine review into crisis management session. Hayes and leadership team were now focused, distancing themselves from arrested executives and demonstrating commitment to legitimate reform. "Ms. Martinez," Hayes said when meeting reconvened, "I want assuring you Tactical Solutions had no knowledge of activities leading to today's arrests. We are committed to full cooperation with expanded investigation and will implement whatever additional safeguards Justice Department deems necessary." Rachel appreciated commitment, but she had learned judging companies by actions rather than statements. Real test would be whether Tactical Solutions maintained reform efforts. When federal oversight was eventually reduced and public attention moved to other issues. "Mr. Hayes, Justice Department will be monitoring compliance very closely given expanded conspiracy scope. Companies' future contracting privileges will depend on demonstrating sustained commitment to merit-based evaluation and hiring practices." As meeting concluded, Rachel reflected on how far investigation had progressed from her original sabotaged evaluation. What had begun as personal quest for vindication had evolved into comprehensive assault on systematic discrimination throughout defense contracting industry. Morning's announced arrests represented culmination of years of careful investigation and strategic prosecution. People responsible for maintaining discriminatory practices had been held accountable. Systems they created had been dismantled, and culture enabling their actions was being systematically reformed. But Rachel also understood victory was fragile and required ongoing protection. Incentives creating original discrimination networks still existed, and new bias forms would inevitably emerge if vigilance was relaxed. Her role as federal investigator had evolved from documenting specific violations to preventing future discrimination through comprehensive oversight and enforcement. It was more complex than precision shooting, but required same fundamental skills: patience, accuracy, and willingness to take action when target was clearly identified. War against systematic discrimination would never be completely won, but important battles had been fought and victories achieved. Shot seeming to end her career had actually begun process protecting thousands of future candidates from bias and retaliation she had experienced. As she prepared leaving Tactical Solutions for what might be final time, Rachel allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Systems designed excluding qualified candidates had been exposed and dismantled. Responsible people had faced meaningful consequences. Culture enabling discrimination was being systematically reformed. Precision had been maintained. Target had been acquired and shot had found its mark. Justice, like accurate shooting, required patience, skill, and courage to act when moment was right. Moment had been right, action had been taken, and target had been eliminated. 5 years after her sabotaged evaluation, Rachel Martinez stood at the National Defense University podium, addressing an audience of military officers, defense contractors, and federal investigators. Her keynote speech at the annual Military Contracting Ethics Conference marked symbolic conclusion to her journey from discrimination victim to industry reform architect. The auditorium was packed with people whose careers had been shaped by changes Rachel had helped implement. Former evaluation manipulation victims sat alongside executives who had reformed their company's practices. Federal investigators who had built careers prosecuting discrimination shared space with defense contractors who had embraced merit-based evaluation systems. The shot that changed everything wasn't the one that missed. Rachel began, her voice carrying clearly through the large hall. It was the one that exposed the truth. The audience listened intently as Rachel recounted the investigation transforming an entire industry. Her story had become legendary within defense contracting circles, not just as individual courage example, but as proof that systematic discrimination could be identified, prosecuted, and eliminated through persistent effort and strategic action. Statistical evidence of transformation was compelling. In 5 years since Kane Network exposure, defense contractors had hired women and minorities for overseas assignments at rates finally reflecting their representation in qualified candidate pool. Evaluation manipulation had become virtually impossible due to comprehensive oversight systems and real-time assessment process monitoring. More importantly, industry culture had changed. Fear and suspicion, once characterizing candidate experiences, had been replaced by confidence in fair evaluation processes. People now believed their success or failure would be determined by their own performance rather than demographic characteristics or political considerations. But Rachel's speech also acknowledged ongoing challenges maintaining reform in industry, with strong economic incentives for returning to discriminatory practices. Vigilance isn't just a principle, she told audience. It's daily commitment to choosing merit over convenience, fairness over favoritism, and justice over tradition. Her crusade's personal cost had been substantial, but ultimately worthwhile. Rachel's federal investigation career had been professionally rewarding and personally fulfilling in ways private security work never could have been. Her expertise identifying and prosecuting systematic discrimination had made her one of most respected investigators in federal service. Professional recognition had been accompanied by personal satisfaction going beyond career success. Rachel had received hundreds of letters from people whose careers had been protected or restored through reforms she had helped implement. Young women and minorities entering the defense contracting field now faced opportunities systematically denied to previous generations. Congressional testimony, criminal trials, and media attention had established Rachel as national advocate for employment. Discrimination enforcement. Her technical expertise and compelling personal story had made her effective spokesperson for comprehensive civil rights protection in federal contracting. But perhaps most meaningful recognition had come from her former tactical solutions colleagues. Company had not only survived discrimination scandal, but had thrived under reformed leadership prioritizing merit-based evaluation and inclusive hiring practices. Their operational effectiveness had actually improved as they gained access to full range of qualified candidates rather than artificially limited pool that discrimination had created. Jessica Torres, whose evaluation Rachel had protected from sabotage, had become one of company's most successful overseas operators. Her performance had validated Rachel's belief that merit-based selection would produce better operational outcomes than demographic preferences disguised as quality standards. Marcus Thompson's prosecution and conviction had been personally painful but professionally necessary. His betrayal of reform process had demonstrated individual redemption wasn't sufficient preventing systematic discrimination. Structural changes and ongoing oversight were essential maintaining progress. Thompson's 20-year federal sentence had sent clear message that cooperation with discrimination investigations didn't provide immunity for subsequent discriminatory conspiracy participation. Message had been particularly effective because Thompson's technical expertise had made him valuable to companies seeking to circumvent oversight systems. Rebecca Walsh had served 3 years of her 15-year sentence before being granted early release in recognition of her cooperation with expanded investigation. Her testimony about cultural and structural factors enabling systematic discrimination had been valuable in designing prevention systems for other companies. Walsh's cooperation had been motivated partly by genuine remorse and partly by practical sentence reduction considerations. But regardless of motives, her insider knowledge had helped investigators understand how discrimination networks operated and evolved in response to enforcement pressure. Robert Kane had served his full 8-year sentence and faced lifetime exclusion from federal contracting work. His strategic assessment solutions firm had been dissolved, its assets seized to compensate discrimination victims. Comprehensive destruction of his business had eliminated any incentive for other consulting firms developing similar discrimination as a service offerings. Financial penalties imposed on companies purchasing Kane's services had totaled over $200 million in fines and victim compensation. Economic consequences had been substantial enough deterring future discrimination while providing meaningful remediation to people whose careers had been damaged by systematic bias. But most significant change had been cultural rather than legal or financial. Defense contracting industry had developed genuine commitment to merit-based evaluation, going beyond mere compliance with federal requirements. Companies had discovered inclusive hiring practices actually improved their operational effectiveness and competitive positioning. Transformation hadn't been immediate or universal. Some companies had required ongoing federal oversight maintaining reform commitments. Others had struggled with unconscious bias persisting even after explicit discrimination elimination. Few had attempted circumventing oversight systems and faced additional prosecution and penalties. But overall trajectory had been clearly positive. Industry was systematically excluding qualified candidates based on demographic characteristics had evolved into one prioritizing merit and performance above all other considerations. Rachel's role in this transformation had evolved from prosecutor to educator to guardian of ongoing reform. Her current position as Director of Defense Contractor Compliance gave her oversight responsibility maintaining achieved changes while identifying and preventing new discrimination forms. Work was intellectually challenging and personally meaningful, in ways precision shooting had never been. Instead of hitting individual targets at specific moments, Rachel was now engaged in long-term strategic efforts maintaining systematic fairness across entire industry. Skills were transferable in unexpected ways. Patience required for long-range shooting translated into persistence needed for comprehensive investigations. Precision needed for accurate targeting became attention to detail required for building prosecutable cases. Mental discipline of remaining calm under pressure proved essential for testifying in high-stakes trials and congressional hearings. But most important similarity was willingness to take action when moment was right. Rachel's intervention during Jessica's evaluation had required split-second decision-making based on real-time analysis of developing situations. Her decision exposing broader discrimination network had required similar courage to act decisively when justice opportunity presented itself. As her keynote speech concluded, Rachel reflected on journey bringing her from dusty training range to national podium. Shots seeming to end her career had actually begun process protecting thousands of future candidates from discrimination and retaliation she had experienced. Most important lesson I've learned, Rachel told her audience, is that justice isn't automatic. It requires people willing to identify injustice, document it comprehensively, and act decisively to eliminate it. Shot that counts isn't always one you plan to take. Sometimes it's one that takes you by surprise and demands everything you have. Standing ovation that followed was gratifying, but Rachel was already thinking about challenges ahead. New discrimination forms would inevitably emerge as technology evolved and industry practices changed. Maintaining vigilance would require sustained commitment from investigators, prosecutors, and industry leaders understanding that fairness wasn't just legally required, but operationally essential. After conference, Rachel received text message from Agent Williams, promoted to lead Justice Department's Civil Rights Enforcement Division. Saw your speech online. Perfect targeting as always. New case developing in cybersecurity contracting, interested in taking point? Rachel smiled, typing her response. Send me details. Some targets are worth the effort. Message was more than professional courtesy. It was recognition that work identifying and eliminating systematic discrimination was ongoing and essential. Each victory created space for new challenges. Each reform enabled new bias forms to emerge. Each success required new vigilance to maintain. But Rachel was ready for whatever came next. Precision shooting skills defying her military career had evolved into something more powerful and important. She had learned to target injustice with same accuracy she had once applied to distant enemies. Scope was different, range was longer, and stakes were higher. But fundamental principle remained unchanged. When you have clear target and skill to hit it, you take the shot. Shots seeming to destroy her career had actually revealed her true calling. Evaluation designed to exclude her had instead exposed systems excluding thousands of others. Discrimination meant to silence her voice had amplified it into national. Platform for justice. Standing outside National Defense University as sun set over Washington, Rachel allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Journey from sabotaged evaluation to keynote speaker had been longer and more challenging than any military campaign she had experienced. But it had also been more meaningful than anything she had imagined when she first took position behind rifle on that dusty training range. Shot missing its intended target had found something more important. Truth that systematic discrimination could be identified, prosecuted, and eliminated through courage, persistence, and precision. Target had been acquired, shot had been taken, and justice had been served. System trying to exclude her had been transformed into one protecting everyone who came after. In the end, that was the only shot that really mattered, the one that ensured merit would always hit its mark. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.